I was 23 when I first held a human heart in my hands. It was inside a sterile operating theater at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and the lead surgeon, Dr Elowen Mercer, had her fingers deep in a coronary bypass graft. I was the second-year surgical resident she had personally selected to assist. "Pass me the vein retractor, Ayla." Her voice was calm and steady beneath the magnifying loupes. I handed her the instrument without a tremor. The patient's chest was open under blazing lights, and I could see every delicate pulse of the pericardium. Outside this room, nobody called me Ayla. They called me the girl who choked. They called me the one who froze during her first trauma code. They called me a nepotism admit because my mother had once chaired the board of the free health clinic in Dorchester. And if they dug deep enough, they would remember the scandal at Whitmore Medical School 3 years ago. The forged complaint letters, the sabotaged surgical kit, the boy I had loved since I was 8 years old, who swore he would marry me, and then systematically destroyed my career before it ever started. I didn't think about Callum Hawke when I was inside an operating room. I had trained myself to push him into a dark attic of my mind. But tonight, after the bypass was complete and the patient was wheeled to recovery, I walked out into the Boston winter, and the cold air hit my cheeks, and I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. Callum Hawke was being investigated for gross medical negligence, and I had been named to the review board. The past was dragging itself back into my life like a badly sutured wound. Let me begin where it all started. I met Callum Hawke when I was 6 years old. Our families lived on the same tree-lined street in Brookline, Massachusetts. Our mothers were both pediatric nurses at Boston Children's Hospital. We shared a sandbox, a tricycle, and every childhood fever. When I was 8, I asked my father how hearts worked, and he pulled out an old anatomy textbook, and Callum sat beside me on the porch, tracing the diagrams with his finger. "One day we'll be surgeons together, Ayla." He said it with such conviction that I believed it. He was a skinny boy with messy brown hair and a laugh that sounded like a puppy barking. He held my hand during thunderstorms and told me I was the smartest person he knew. And when puberty hit and my body thickened and my face broke out and the boys at school called me the chunky chick with the frizzy hair, I clung to that little boy on the porch like a life raft. But Callum was changing too. He grew tall and lean, he joined the rowing team, and his jaw sharpened into something that made girls whisper in the hallway. By sophomore year at Brookline High, the popular crowd absorbed him. He stopped waiting for me after biology class. He started sitting with Valentina Cross at lunch. Valentina was the daughter of a Harvard Medical School dean. She had platinum blonde hair, ice blue eyes, and a wardrobe of cashmere sweaters that probably cost more than my mother's monthly salary. She was effortlessly cruel in the way that only deeply secure people can be. Callum fell into her orbit like a satellite caught by a larger planet. But he never fully let me go. He kept me on a strange elastic tether. Sometimes he would show up at my locker and tell me he missed talking to me about real things. He would text me late at night asking if I remembered the summer he built a treehouse, and I would type back whole paragraphs of hope. In public, he acted like I was a stranger. I internalized all of it. I thought if I lost weight, if I got better grades, if I scrubbed into more procedures, if I became indispensable, then he would finally choose me. So I starved myself during high school. I exercised until my knees ached, and I survived on black coffee and cucumber slices. I graduated valedictorian and got into Whitmore Medical School on a full scholarship. Callum got in too, on a legacy recommendation from Valentina's father. I told myself we were still on the same path. We moved into the dorms, and for a fleeting moment, things felt almost like childhood again. We studied anatomy together in the library at 2 a.m. He bought me a chai latte once, and I saved the cup for 3 months. I was so pathetically starved for his affection that I accepted any crumb. Then came the Hollander Surgical Fellowship. It was the most coveted residency track in the country. One Whitmore graduate each year would be selected for a 5-year integrated cardiothoracic program at the Hollander Heart Institute in Chicago. The fellowship guaranteed mentorship under Dr. Leon Hollander himself, a living legend who had pioneered a revolutionary valve repair technique. The selection process was brutal. It involved academic ranking, clinical evaluations, letters of recommendation, and a live demonstration of a simulated surgical procedure on a synthetic heart model. I had been preparing for this since the moment I entered medical school. I had logged more volunteer hours in the anatomy lab than any other student. I had shadowed 3 attending surgeons and written a published paper on minimally invasive mitral valve repair. I was the top candidate by every metric. But Valentina Cross also applied. Her father's connections made her a powerful contender despite her mediocre clinical scores. And Callum applied too. We all stood on the precipice together. The night before the final simulation exam, I was in the surgical skills lab practicing my suture technique on a silicone pad. Callum appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. He looked exhausted, and his eyes were rimmed with red. "Hey, Ace," he said, using the childhood nickname he had given me when I aced a spelling test in 3rd grade. "You've been here for 14 hours. I smiled weakly and accepted the tea. It was chamomile, warm and sweet. He sat down on a stool and watched me work. "You're gonna win this thing, Ayla," he said softly. "I've seen everyone else's prep, and they're not even close." I felt a flutter in my chest that I now recognize as pathetic hope. He stayed for an hour, talking about old times. He reminded me of the anatomy textbook on the porch. He told me he was proud of me. And then he left. I finished my tea, and I remember feeling an overwhelming wave of drowsiness. I assumed it was fatigue. I put my head down on the desk for a moment. I woke up 7 hours later with my cheek pressed against cold linoleum and the winter sun streaming through the windows. The simulation exam started in 20 minutes. I scrambled upright, and my heart stopped. My surgical practice kit was missing. The locked drawer where I stored my personal instruments had been pried open. My forceps, my needle drivers, my custom calipers, all of it was gone. I grabbed my phone and saw a string of messages from my attending physician. "Ayla, where are you? Ayla, you missed the final prep meeting. Ayla, several of your peer evaluations have been flagged by the committee." I ran to the simulation center in my wrinkled scrubs with my hair unwashed and my brain fogged by whatever drug had been in that tea. When I burst through the doors, the exam was already underway. Valentina was at the main simulation bay, her hands steady inside the synthetic heart model. The evaluators glanced at me with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. "Dr. Kincaid," said the committee chair coldly, "you are 40 minutes late, and we have received 3 separate complaints from students alleging you attempted to access their simulation prep materials last night. Your access card was logged at 2 terminals you had no authorization to enter." I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick. I told them about the tea, about waking up on the floor, about the missing instruments. It sounded like a cheap excuse, even to my own ears. One of the evaluators, Dr. Roberta Keene, looked at me with particular disappointment. I had admired her for years. "Ayla," she said quietly, "I expected better from you." I was disqualified from the fellowship. Valentina won. I sat on a bench outside the simulation center for 4 hours. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body felt like it was full of wet sand. Callum never came to find me. He didn't answer my texts. He didn't answer my calls. That evening, I walked to the medical records office to retrieve a copy of my access card log. I needed to prove that I hadn't been at those terminals. The clerk pulled up the record and frowned. "That's odd," he said. "The timestamps are from a card that was reported stolen 3 days ago. Yours was flagged and a replacement was issued." My blood went cold. Who reported it stolen? The clerk squinted at the screen. "Callum Hawk? He said he found your card in the anatomy lab and handed it to security." I left the office in a daze. The next morning, I went to the anatomy lab early. I searched through the storage closet where the simulation hearts were kept. Behind a stack of artificial lungs, I found my missing instrument kit. It had been deliberately tampered with. The forceps were bent. The calipers were coated in a sticky residue that looked like cyanoacrylate glue. Tucked inside the case was a folded piece of paper. It was a printed email chain between Valentina Cross and Callum Hawk. I think I still remember every word. Valentina wrote, "Cal, you're a genius. The tea knocked her out cold and I swiped her kit while she was drooling on the desk. The look on her face when she walked into the sim center was priceless." Callum replied, "Don't get too excited. I reported her card stolen so the access logs would flag her. It'll look like she tried to cheat." Valentina wrote, "You're so whipped for me." Callum wrote, "Just don't forget who got you this spot." I read the email 5 times. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I folded the paper and slipped it into my coat pocket. I walked to the dean's office and I withdrew my application to the Hollander Fellowship entirely. The dean asked why. I said I had decided to pursue a residency in emergency medicine at County General in Chicago instead. It was a lie. I had no plan. I just couldn't stomach competing in the same pool as the 2 people who had destroyed me. That afternoon, I called my mother. "Mom," I said, my voice very steady, "I need you to go to the Hawks house and formally revoke the marriage understanding." She was silent for a long time. "Ayla, are you absolutely certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." She didn't ask for details. She just said, "I'll take care of it, sweetheart." I spent the next week in a fog, but the punishment wasn't over. At the annual Whitmore Awards Gala, the student body voted for the Preston Surgical Promise Award, given to the most promising future surgeon. I was nominated alongside Valentina. I didn't attend the gala. I couldn't face the stares. My roommate Jenna texted me updates. Tied vote, she typed. Then Callum got called up as the tiebreaker since he was the departing student council president. My stomach clenched. He voted for Valentina. I stared at my phone. I typed back, "Thanks for telling me." And then I put my phone down and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. A week later, the medical school hosted its graduating class showcase. It was supposed to be a celebration. Each department put on a skit. The surgery department's contribution was written and directed by Valentina Cross. I didn't know what it contained until I was sitting in the auditorium with 300 classmates. The skit was called The Anatomy of a Fraud. A girl in a fat suit lumbered onto stage with exaggerated clumsiness. She knocked over IV poles and dropped prosthetic organs. She spoke in a high, squeaky voice. "I'm going to be the bestest surgeon ever if I can just stop eating donuts for 5 minutes." The audience screamed with laughter. Then the Callum character appeared. He was played by a handsome rower in a white coat. "Ew," he said, stepping over the fat suit girl. "I'd rather perform surgery with a rusty spoon than work with a walking liability." The girl on stage pretended to cry and the audience howled louder. I sat in the very back row, my face burning. Jenna gripped my hand so hard it hurt. "Ayla, let's go." I couldn't move. I watched the whole thing. I watched the caricature of me get rejected by the caricature of Callum. I watched the Valentina character sweep in and save the day. I watched my entire medical school experience reduced to a punchline. When the skit ended, the applause was deafening. Valentina took a bow and Callum stood in the wings clapping with a faint smile on his face. He was scanning the crowd as if looking for me. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me react. I slipped out the side door and walked home through the frozen streets of Boston. My phone buzzed with a text from Callum. "Hey, it was just a joke. Everyone is stressed before graduation. Don't overthink it." I didn't reply. I never replied to him again. 3 weeks later, I packed 2 suitcases and boarded a plane to Chicago. I had applied to a dozen residency programs in a desperate blitz after the fellowship disaster. The only one that accepted me was a grueling emergency medicine track at Cook County Hospital. It wasn't cardiothoracic surgery. It wasn't the dream I had held since I was 6 years old. But it was far away from Boston, and that was the only thing that mattered. I arrived at O'Hare Airport on a sweltering August afternoon. I took a cab to a crumbling apartment in Logan Square that I found on Craigslist. The building smelled like boiled cabbage, and the radiator clanked all night. That first night, I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself in the cracked mirror. My hair hung in a limp ponytail, the same hairstyle I had worn since high school because Callum once said he liked long hair. I found a pair of scissors in the drawer. I cut it all off. Chin length at first, then shorter. The hair fell into the sink in thick, dark clumps. When I finished, I looked like a different person. I had a round face and soft features, but my eyes were sharp and very, very tired. "The girl with the ponytail is dead," I whispered to the mirror. I didn't cry. I just went to bed and woke up at 4 a.m. for my first shift. County General was a furnace. The emergency department never stopped screaming. Gunshot wounds, overdoses, heart attacks, strokes. I learned more in my first month than I had in 2 years of medical school. My attending physician was a terrifying force of nature named Dr. Camille Baptiste. She was a Haitian-American surgeon who had trained in war zones, and she had zero tolerance for self-pity. "Kincaid," she barked at me on my second day, "your hands are shaking. Get your cortisol under control or you'll kill someone." I got it under control. I worked 90-hour weeks. I stopped eating vending machine garbage and started meal prepping. I dropped the weight I had carried since puberty, not by starving, but by simply not having time to think about food. My scrubs started fitting differently. But more importantly, my mind started fitting differently. I stopped flinching when people shouted. I stopped replaying Callum's words in my head. I stopped dreaming about him. 6 months into my residency, I saved a patient's life. It was a 14-year-old boy with a cardiac contusion from a car accident. His heart was tamponating, and Dr. Baptiste was in another trauma bay. I performed an emergency pericardiocentesis with my own hands. The needle went in, and the blood drained, and the boy's pressure stabilized. Dr. Baptiste watched from the doorway. "Not bad, Kincaid," she said. That was the highest praise I had ever received. I chased that feeling for the next 2 years. I transferred into a combined emergency and critical care track. I published 2 papers on trauma resuscitation protocols. I presented at the American College of Surgeons conference. I met a man named Theo Decker at a medical ethics lecture. He was a pediatric intensivist with kind brown eyes and a quiet laugh. He asked me to coffee, and I said yes. We dated slowly. He met my mother on a video call, and he charmed her within minutes. He learned about Boston, but not from me. He found out from an old classmate who told me I had been cheated out of a fellowship.
He never pushed me to talk about it. He just said one evening, "I'm glad you ended up here." I kissed him and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety.
3 years after I fled Boston, I was standing in the atrium of the McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago. I was a rising star in trauma surgery. I had been invited to keynote a panel on equitable access to emergency cardiac care. I wore a tailored navy blazer and my short hair was styled in a sleek wave. I felt calm. As I walked toward the presentation hall, I saw a face from a nightmare. Valentina Cross was standing near the registration desk. She looked thinner and her expression was pinched. When she saw me, her mouth dropped open. "Ayla!" I kept walking. She grabbed my arm. "Ayla, wait, please!" I turned and looked at her. My face was blank. "I have nothing to say to you, Valentina." She looked frantic. "Callum is in trouble," she blurted. "He got sued for a surgical error at Northwestern. The board is reviewing his license, and your name is on the review panel." I tilted my head. "I know." She stared at me. "You have to recuse yourself." I said nothing. I just walked into the auditorium and delivered my keynote to 300 surgeons. After the talk, a man approached me. He was gaunt and hollow-eyed. His suit was expensive but rumpled. "Callum Hawke." "Ayla," he said, his voice cracking. "I just listened to your lecture. It was brilliant." "Thank you. Can we talk?" I looked at him for a long moment. I felt nothing. No anger, no longing, no sadness. Just a vast, quiet emptiness where he used to live. "All right," I said. We sat down at an empty table in the convention center cafe. He stared at my face like he was memorizing every line. "You look completely different," he whispered. "I am completely different." He nodded slowly. "I know. I heard about your work at County. You've saved so many lives." He paused, and his eyes filled with tears. "I need to tell you something, Ayla." I waited. "The night before your simulation exam," he said, "I put a benzodiazepine in your tea. I crushed a tablet of lorazepam and dissolved it in the chamomile." He swallowed hard. "Valentina told me it would just make you sleep through the prep meeting. She said she wanted to borrow your instruments to psych you out." But I knew what she was really gonna do. I knew she was gonna destroy your kit, and I let her. Tears were streaming down his face now. "I wrote the email chain she left in your instrument case. I wanted evidence that I was complicit. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me wanted to get caught." I sat very still. "And the access card?" I said. "I reported your card stolen. I gave security a fake story. I planted the access logs that made you look like a cheater." He covered his face with his hands. "I ruined your fellowship, and then I stood on stage and laughed while Valentina humiliated you in front of the entire school." He was sobbing now. "I haven't slept through a single night in 3 years. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face when you walked into that simulation center." I leaned back in my chair and crossed my legs. "Why are you telling me this now?" He lifted his head. "Because the review board is going to take my license and I deserve it. But before that happens, I need you to know that I know what I did. I need you to hear me say it was all my fault." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me, Callum." I didn't say, "I forgive you." He seemed to understand. "Is there any chance?" he started. "No," I said. He closed his eyes. I figured. I stood up and gathered my bag. "The review board meets next Thursday," I said. "I won't recuse myself, and I won't vote with malice. I'll evaluate your case on its merits." "That's more than I deserve." "Yes, it is." I turned to leave. "Ayla?" he called after me. I paused. "Do you ever think about the porch?" he asked, his voice very small. I thought about it. I thought about the anatomy textbook in the summer thunderstorm and a little boy who held my hand. I thought about the tea and the ruined instruments and the skit and the 300 people laughing. "Yes," I said quietly. "But that girl doesn't live here anymore." I walked away and didn't look back. That night, Theo and I cooked dinner in our apartment. We made pasta with mushrooms, and he told me about a toddler he had extubated that afternoon. "I did an amazing thing today," I said. He looked at me. "What did you do?" "I closed the door on a ghost. He didn't ask for details. He just put his hand over mine and held it. The review board convened on a cold, gray morning. Callum's case was straightforward. He had mistakenly transected a patient's common bile duct during a routine cholecystectomy. The patient survived but required multiple corrective surgeries. The board heard testimony from the surgical team, the hospital administration, and Callum himself. When it was my turn, I asked him one question. Dr. Hawk, do you believe you can practice medicine without endangering future patients? He looked at me, and his voice was steady. Not right now. I need time, I need therapy, I need to rebuild my foundation. I nodded. I recommend a suspension with mandatory psychological evaluation and supervised probation upon reinstatement. The board voted, and my recommendation passed with a majority. Callum thanked the panel, and his eyes met mine briefly. There was no message in his gaze. Just a quiet, exhausted acknowledgement. He walked out of the hearing room, and I never saw him again. 6 months later, Theo and I got married in a small ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden. My mother cried. Dr. Baptiste gave a toast that made the whole room laugh. I wore a simple white dress, and my hair was still short. Theo whispered, "You are the most extraordinary person I have ever met." I kissed him, and I believed him.
This spring, I was appointed the Director of Emergency Cardiac Services at the New Hollander Heart Institute. The irony was not lost on me. The fellowship I lost launched me toward a different path, and that path had circled back to the very institution that once rejected me. I walked into my new office on the first day and found a small package on my desk. It contained a worn anatomy textbook, the same edition my father had used to teach me about the heart. There was a note tucked inside. Ayla, congratulations. You deserved this then, and you deserve it now. I'm sorry I took so long to say it. There was no signature, but I recognized the handwriting. I placed the textbook on my shelf, and I didn't throw it away. I didn't need to. Callum Hawk was now a family medicine physician in rural Vermont. He did pro bono work for migrant farm workers, and he had reportedly become an entirely different person. I felt no urge to reach out. The story was complete. Today, I stand in a surgical theater with a team of residents watching me. I am performing a complex mitral valve repair. The patient is a 40-year-old mother of 3. My hands are steady, my mind is clear. In the corner of the room, Theo is watching through the observation window. He gives me a small thumbs up. I wink behind my mask. The valve comes together perfectly. I close the incision and I hand the needle driver to my junior resident. You learn this technique, I tell him, by doing it 1,000 times until your fingers know the heart better than your brain. He nods reverently.
Later, I walk out into the Chicago sunshine. The skyline is sharp and beautiful against the blue lake. I think about the girl on the linoleum floor. I think about the broken instruments and the forged cards. I think about the laughter in that auditorium. And I realize something profound. That girl wasn't weak. She was just waiting for the right moment to stand up. She gathered every splinter of betrayal, and she whittled them into scalpels. She stitched herself back together with sutures made of sheer stubborn will, and she walked into a new life, leaving behind a ghost who would spend his own life trying to catch up. I am not defined by what was taken from me. I am defined by what I built from the wreckage, and what I built is unbreakable. I slide into Theo's car and he asks, "How was it?" "Just another day at the office," I say. He laughs and we drive toward the lake. The sun glints off the water. My phone buzzes with an email from a young medical student asking to shadow me. I reply yes with no hesitation, because every door that was slammed in my face taught me how to hold the door open for someone else. That is the legacy I choose. Not revenge, not bitterness, just a quiet, burning certainty that the best way to defeat someone who tried to destroy you is to become someone who built. I am an architect of hearts, and every beat that I salvage, every pulse that I restore, is a testimony that the girl they tried to bury did not just survive, she thrived.